Some secrets are buried so deep that only blood can bring them to the surface. The Christmas tree farm sat like a green scar against the storm-darkened mountains of Humboldt County, its neat rows hiding something far more sinister than holiday cheer. Marcus Castellanos pulled his Harley off Highway 101, rain streaming down his weathered face as he stared through the chain-link fence at what his club brothers had spotted 3 days ago. Behind those innocent evergreens lay a compound that intelligence suggested belonged to the world's most wanted drug lord, right here on American soil. What his fellow angels didn't know was that Marcus had been hunting this ghost for 10 years, ever since the botched operation that destroyed his DEA career and killed his partner. Now, as he watched his brothers gear up for what they thought would be the heist of a lifetime, a cold dread settled in his chest. The compound was too quiet, too perfect, too much like the bait in every trap he'd ever seen. Why would the most paranoid criminal alive choose to hide in plain sight? And why did this feel exactly like the setup that had cost him everything before? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of approaching Harleys cut through the October rain like chainsaws through silence. Marcus killed his engine and stepped off his bike, his boots squelching in the muddy shoulder as the rest of the Redwood chapter pulled up behind him. 8 riders in rain-slicked leather, their faces hard beneath dripping helmet visors. Men who'd followed him through 3 states and countless scores, trusting his instincts even though none of them knew about the badge he'd once carried. "Jesus Christ, Ghost," Tank Martinez called out, pulling off his helmet to reveal a scarred face that had seen too many bar fights. "You look like you've seen the devil himself." Marcus forced a grin, the expression feeling foreign on his lips. "Just thinking about Christmas morning, brother. All those presents waiting for us down there." But the joke fell flat even as he said it. The compound sprawled below them in the valley, its security lights cutting harsh geometric patterns through the pine forest. Too many lights for a tree farm, too many vehicles parked in precise military formations, too many blind spots that weren't actually blind. Marcus had spent enough years hunting predators to recognize the careful choreography of a kill box. "Intel says 40 million in cash," said Diesel, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms, spitting tobacco juice into the rain. "Plus enough product to keep us flush for 5 years. Marcus nodded, though his gut churned with each detail. The intelligence had come too easy, arrived through channels that pinged every alarm bell in his suspicious mind. A contact of a contact who claimed to have inside knowledge of El Chapo's American operations. Information that painted a picture of impossible vulnerability, the world's most paranoid cartel boss supposedly holed up with minimal security, maximum cash, just begging to be robbed. "Security rotation changes at midnight," continued Diesel, consulting notes that had somehow appeared perfectly typed and detailed. "Skeleton crew during the storm. Guards will be inside, dry and comfortable." The same way they'd been comfortable 10 years ago in Guadalajara, Marcus thought, remembering Agent Sarah Chen's blood on warehouse concrete. The same perfect intelligence, the same too-good-to-be-true opportunity, the same feeling of ice water in his veins as the trap closed around him. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and Marcus watched lightning illuminate the compound's rooflines. Modern buildings disguised as rustic farm structures, satellite dishes hidden among the trees, guard towers built to look like hunting blinds. This wasn't El Chapo's hideout. This was a government installation, complete with the kind of surveillance infrastructure that would make the NSA proud. "We go in at 0100, announced Rocco Benedetti, the chapter president, his Boston accent cutting through the rain. "Ghost takes point with Tank and Diesel. Rest of us secure the perimeter." Marcus had ridden with these men for 3 years, watching their backs through drug runs from Tijuana to Seattle. They'd pulled him out of more than one bad situation, treated him like family when he'd had nothing left but a fake identity and a death wish. Now he was about to watch them walk into a slaughter. "Rocco," Marcus said carefully, "maybe we should sit on this another day. Something feels off." The president's eyes narrowed. Off how? How could he explain without revealing who he really was? That his instincts were honed by 15 years of federal law enforcement, That he recognized the tactical positioning of a federal interdiction site? That somewhere in those buildings, men with badges and automatic weapons were probably watching them through thermal scopes right now? Too easy, he said finally. When's the last time anything this big came gift-wrapped? Tank laughed, rain dripping from his beard. Ghost's getting paranoid in his old age. Next thing you know, he'll be seeing CIA spooks behind every tree. If only you knew, Marcus thought. Because somewhere down there, behind those two convenient walls, sat answers to questions that had haunted him for a decade. The operation that destroyed his career hadn't been a simple intelligence failure. Someone had wanted Agent Marcus Castellanos burned, his partner dead, his investigation buried. The same someone who might very well be waiting in that compound right now. "Brothers," Rocco said, his voice carrying the weight of final authority. "We've been planning this for 3 weeks. Intel's solid. Payday's down there waiting for us. We go tonight." Marcus nodded, though every instinct screamed for him to run. But these men had become his family, twisted and violent though it was. And somewhere in those buildings lay either the biggest score of their criminal careers or the answers to the betrayal that had cost him everything he'd once believed in. As the Hells Angels began their final equipment check, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 3 years. His finger hovered over Detective Rita Vasquez's contact, the only cop who'd believed his story about corruption in the DEA. The only person who might remember Marcus Castellanos had once been one of the good guys. Then he deleted the number and tucked the phone away. Tonight there would be no backup coming. The rain hammered against the windows of the Rusty Anchor as Marcus nursed his third whiskey, watching the amber liquid swirl in patterns that reminded him of blood pooling on concrete. 6 hours had passed since he'd deleted Rita's number, and the weight of that decision sat in his chest like a tumor. Around him, his brothers celebrated their upcoming payday with the kind of reckless abandon that came from men who'd never learned to count the cost of their choices. "Ghost!" Tank's voice boomed across the smoky bar. "Quit brooding like some lovesick teenager and get over here. Diesel's telling war stories." Marcus forced himself to smile and joined the circle of leather-clad killers who'd become the closest thing to family he'd known in years. These weren't good men. They ran drugs, guns, and worse through Northern California's backwoods. But they were his men now. The badge in his past meant nothing to bikers who measured loyalty in blood spilled and risks shared. "Remember that Border Patrol station in Yuma?" Diesel was saying, his scarred hands gesturing wildly. "Ghost here walked right into their command post, bold as brass, told them he was ATF running a joint op. Had them clearing our route while we moved 2 tons of Mexican brown through their own checkpoint." The others laughed, but Marcus remembered the sick feeling in his stomach as he'd flashed credentials that were real enough to pass inspection. Using his federal law enforcement training to facilitate drug smuggling had been the final nail in Agent Marcus Castellanos' coffin. After that night, there'd been no going back to the man he used to be. "That's our ghost," Rocco said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "Always thinking 3 moves ahead. That's why tonight's gonna work." But Marcus wasn't thinking about tonight anymore. His mind had drifted to the life he'd lost, the one that felt more like a half-remembered dream with each passing year. There'd been a house in San Diego once, with a mortgage and a vegetable garden that Sarah Chen helped him plant on weekends between operations. There'd been talk of early retirement, maybe teaching at Quantico, raising kids who would never know their father had spent 15 years swimming in the same sewers as the predators he hunted. Sarah would have been 43 now. She'd planned to open a consulting firm after leaving the DEA, help corporations with security assessments. Instead, she died in a Guadalajara warehouse because someone had sold them out, and Marcus had spent the last decade drowning in whiskey and violence rather than face the truth about who'd pulled the trigger. "You still with us, brother?" Tank asked, genuine concern creeping into his voice. "Just thinking about Christmas," Marcus lied, the same way he'd been lying for 3 years. The truth was that he thought about Sarah every day, about the wedding ring he'd never had the chance to buy, about the children who'd never exist, about the retirement party that turned into a funeral. The Hells Angels had given him purpose when he'd had none, but they couldn't give him back the pieces of himself that had died with his partner. His phone buzzed, a text from his sponsor at the VA. "Missed group tonight. Everything okay?" Marcus deleted the message without responding. Dr. Phillips meant well, but the PTSD support group was another relic from his attempt at legitimate rehabilitation. Hard to explain combat stress when you couldn't talk about the real war you'd been fighting, the one that had cost him his badge, his partner, and his faith in the system he'd served. "Time to go, brothers," Rocco announced, checking his watch. "Ghost, you good?" Marcus looked around the table at faces that had become familiar over years of small-time scores and long rides through the redwood forests. Tank, who sent money to his ex-wife every month despite her restraining order. Diesel, who read philosophy books when he thought nobody was watching. Even Rocco, whose Boston working-class values had been twisted into something brutal but oddly honorable. They trusted him completely, these men who lived outside society's rules. They had no idea that their brother Ghost was really a federal agent who'd gone native, a man whose deepest loyalty was still to a dead partner and a justice system that had betrayed him. When the shooting started tonight, and Marcus knew it would start, these men would die believing their scout had led them true. "I'm good," Marcus said, standing and pulling on his leather jacket. The weight of his .45 felt familiar against his ribs, but tonight it felt heavier than usual. As they walked out into the storm, Marcus caught his reflection in the bar's rain-streaked window. 3 years of living rough had carved new lines around his eyes, and his beard hid the scar from where a cartel enforcer had opened his cheek in Tijuana. But underneath the weathered leather and road dust, Agent Marcus Castellanos was still there, still asking questions that had no good answers. Tonight, he'd finally learn whether the truth was worth dying for. The Harleys roared to life in sequence, their thunder echoing off the rusty anchor's weathered walls like a mechanical war cry. Marcus straddled his bike and felt the familiar vibration travel through his bones as 8 riders formed up behind him in the storm. The rain had turned vicious, driving horizontal sheets that stung exposed skin and turned the mountain roads into ribbons of black ice. They'd made it maybe 10 miles up Highway 101 when Marcus saw the roadblock. Red and blue lights strobed through the darkness ahead, illuminating a line of police cruisers stretched across both lanes. California Highway Patrol, Humboldt County Sheriff, and something else, black SUVs with tinted windows that screamed federal presence. Marcus's blood turned to ice water as he recognized the tactical positioning, the way the vehicles formed overlapping fields of fire. "Shit!" Rocco's voice crackled through the comm system. "Random checkpoint or—" "It's not random," Marcus cut him off, his mind racing through possibilities. He pulled off into a scenic overlook, the others following. Below them, the roadblock waited like a spider in its web. They're looking for someone specific. Tank killed his engine and pulled off his helmet, rain immediately soaking his graying hair. "How do you know?" "Because I've been on the other side of operations like this," Marcus thought. "Because I know what a targeted interdiction looks like when it's designed to catch specific suspects." Instead, he said, "Wrong positioning for a DUI checkpoint. Too much firepower for routine stops." Diesel spat into the mud. "So we go around. Take the logging roads through the forest." "No." The voice that cut through the rain belonged to Agent Rita Vasquez, and Marcus's world tilted on its axis as she stepped out from behind a cluster of pine trees. She wore tactical gear over her DEA windbreaker, her service weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. Behind her, 3 more agents materialized from the darkness like ghosts. The Hells Angels went for their guns in unison, but Vasquez's team already had them covered. "Nobody moves," she called out, her voice carrying the authority that came from 15 years of hunting predators. "Marcus Castellanos, you're under arrest." The silence that followed was broken only by rain drumming against leather and the distant rumble of thunder. Marcus felt 8 pairs of eyes boring into him, saw the exact moment when trust transformed into betrayal on faces he'd learned to read like road maps. "Ghost?" Tank's voice carried the weight of a man watching his world crumble. "What the hell is she talking about?" Vasquez stepped closer, her weapon still trained on the group. "Marcus Castellanos, former DEA special agent, badge number 2847. You've been running with these men for 3 years while we tracked every move, every score, every federal crime you committed." "You son of a bitch," Rocco breathed, his hand inching toward his sidearm. "You're a goddamn Fed." "Was." Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I was a Fed. That ended 10 years ago." "Bullshit," Vasquez snapped. "You never resigned. You went dark after Guadalajara, but you never officially resigned, which makes everything you've done with these men a federal crime committed by a sworn law enforcement officer." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He'd assumed his career was over, that the bureaucrats in Washington had written him off as another casualty of the drug war. The idea that he was still technically a federal agent, that every crime he'd committed with the Angels had exponentially worse consequences, sent his mind reeling. "The compound," he said suddenly, pieces clicking together. "You know about the compound?" Vasquez nodded. "We know you were planning to hit what you think is El Chapo's operation. We also know it's not what it appears to be. Then what is it?" "A test," she said. "Someone's been pulling strings for 3 years, Marcus. Setting up scenarios, watching how you'd react. Tonight was supposed to be the final exam." Diesel's gun cleared leather, despite the federal weapons trained on him. "I don't know what kind of game you people are playing, but Ghost's our brother. You want him, you go through—" The sniper's bullet took Diesel's head apart like a melon, spraying blood and brain matter across the scenic overlook. The crack of the rifle shot echoed off the mountains as Diesel's body hit the ground with a wet thud. "Jesus Christ!" Vasquez spun toward the tree line, her weapon up. "That wasn't us! That wasn't—" More gunfire erupted from the darkness, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning. One of Vasquez's agents went down screaming, then another. The air filled with the whine of bullets and the metallic taste of blood as the ambush unfolded with military precision. Marcus dove behind his Harley as rounds sparked off chrome and shattered glass. Around him, men he'd called brother and agents he'd once called colleague died together in the mud. The ordinary world was gone, burned away in seconds by forces he couldn't see but recognized with sick certainty. Someone had been orchestrating this moment for 3 years, and now the trap was finally closing. The gunfire died as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the drumming rain and the wet gasps of the dying. Marcus pressed himself against his fallen Harley, feeling hot oil seep through his jeans as he counted muzzle flashes in the darkness. Professional positioning. Military precision. This wasn't some cartel hit. This was a sanctioned operation with rules of engagement he didn't understand. "Vasquez!" he called out, his voice hoarse. No response except the gurgling wheeze of someone drowning in their own blood. Tank lay 3 feet away, his massive frame crumpled like a broken toy, eyes staring sightlessly into the storm. Rocco had made it behind a pine tree, but Marcus could see the dark stain spreading across his president's colors. The man who'd given him a second chance at belonging was bleeding out in the mud, and there wasn't a damn thing Marcus could do about it. 3 years of lies, and this is how it ends. He should move. Military training and federal experience both screamed at him to find cover, return fire, establish tactical superiority. But his body wouldn't respond. Every muscle had locked up with the terrible recognition that this moment had been inevitable from the day he'd first put on the Hells Angels prospect patch. Sarah Chen's face floated behind his eyes, not as he'd last seen her in that Guadalajara warehouse, but laughing over coffee in their San Diego kitchen, planning their future with the naive certainty of people who still believed in happy endings. She'd trusted him to keep her safe, the same way Tank and Rocco and even poor Diesel had trusted Ghost to lead them true. I should have walked away in the bar, should have warned them. But what could he have said? That their brother was a federal agent whose past had finally caught up with them all? That the compound below was almost certainly a trap designed to eliminate everyone who knew too much about something that happened a decade ago? The Angels lived by a code that didn't include room for the kind of moral complexity that had been eating Marcus alive for 3 years. A boot crunched on gravel nearby. Marcus forced himself to look up through the rain and saw a figure in tactical gear approaching, assault rifle trained on his position. The operator moved with the fluid confidence of someone who'd done this many times before, sweeping the kill zone with professional efficiency. Marcus Castellanos. The voice was electronically modified, robotic. "You've been very difficult to locate. Who are you?" Marcus kept his hands visible, knowing that any sudden movement would be his last. "What do you want?" "To talk. Your former colleagues at the DEA were insufficient for our needs." Agent Vasquez meant well, but she was operating on incomplete information. The figure gestured toward the tree line, where more shapes materialized from the darkness. A full tactical team, armed and equipped for war. Marcus counted at least 8 operators, all carrying weapons that weren't standard law enforcement issue. This wasn't a DEA operation, or even FBI. This had the smell of something much deeper and more dangerous. "The compound," Marcus said. "It's yours. Very good. Yes, the compound belongs to us. Has for 3 years, ever since we learned about your career change. We've been waiting for you to make contact. Why?" The figure tilted their head, and Marcus caught a glimpse of night vision goggles beneath the tactical helmet. "Because you have something we need. Information about Operation Serpiente, about who really betrayed your team in Guadalajara." Sarah's name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd spent 10 years trying to forget the details of that night, the intelligence that had gone bad, the warehouse that had turned into a slaughterhouse. The official report blamed faulty human and bad luck, but Marcus had never believed it. Someone had wanted that operation to fail, had wanted Sarah Chen dead. "I don't know anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You know everything. You just haven't put the pieces together yet." The figure stepped closer, and Marcus could see his own reflection in the operator's goggles. "The man who destroyed your life, who killed your partner, who's been manipulating your choices for a decade. He's waiting for you at the compound." Marcus's mind reeled. Every decision since Guadalajara suddenly felt orchestrated, from his breakdown and departure from the DEA to his recruitment by the Angels. Even this moment, surrounded by the bodies of men who'd trusted him, felt like another move in a game whose rules he'd never understood. The Angels were never supposed to survive the night. Neither were Agent Vasquez and her team. You were supposed to be the sole survivor, driven by grief and rage to assault the compound alone. But you hesitated. There was something like disappointment in the electronic voice. "You always hesitate, Marcus. It's your greatest weakness and your only virtue." Thunder rolled across the mountains, and Marcus felt the weight of every choice that had led him to this moment. The badge he'd never officially surrendered, the partner whose death still haunted his dreams, the brothers who died believing in his loyalty. Someone was still pulling strings, and Marcus remained trapped in their web. The operator's words hung in the rain-soaked air like a death sentence. Marcus stared at the bodies of his brothers scattered across the overlook. Tank's massive frame twisted at an impossible angle, Rocco's blood mixing with rainwater and engine oil. Diesel's ruined skull a testament to the precision of whoever had orchestrated this massacre. "Stand up," the electronic voice commanded. Marcus rose slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The weight of his .45 felt meaningless against the tactical team surrounding him. 8 professionals who'd just executed a flawless ambush, eliminating witnesses with surgical efficiency while keeping him alive for reasons he was only beginning to understand. "You have a choice," the operator continued. "Walk away now. Disappear into whatever hole you crawled out of 3 years ago. Continue living as Ghost, the biker who never existed. Or come with us to the compound. Learn the truth about Guadalajara. Meet the man who's been pulling your strings since Sarah Chen died in that warehouse." The name hit him like a physical blow every time. Sarah, who'd believed in justice the way other people believed in religion, who died because Marcus had trusted the wrong intelligence, followed the wrong leads, walked into a trap that someone had been setting for months. He'd spent a decade running from her memory, but standing here among fresh corpses, he realized he'd never actually been running at all. He'd been dancing to someone else's tune. "Why keep me alive?" Marcus asked. "If you wanted me at the compound, you could have just taken me. Because you need to choose this path yourself. You need to want the truth more than you want safety." The operator's weapon remained trained on Marcus's center mass. The man waiting for you, he knows how your mind works, knows that forcing you would make you unreliable. But offering you answers about Sarah's death, that's irresistible bait. Marcus looked down at Tank's body. The big man had a photo tucked in his wallet, his daughter's high school graduation, the one he'd watched from across the street because of the restraining order. Tank had been planning to reach out when she turned 18 next month, hoping 3 years of sobriety might earn him a phone call. Now she'd never know her father had been trying to change. "The compound," Marcus said. "Is El Chapo really there?" "El Chapo is dead. Has been for months. What's at the compound is something much more valuable, the network that's been using his name to move assets through the American government. The same network that burned your operation in Guadalajara." The pieces were clicking together with terrible clarity. The intelligence that had gone bad, the warehouse that had become a killing ground, the investigation that had been shut down from above before Marcus could dig too deep. Someone with serious juice had wanted Operation Serpiente to fail, and they'd been covering their tracks for a decade. "Agent Vasquez knew," Marcus said. "Agent Vasquez suspected. That's why she had to die tonight. Her investigation was getting too close to people who prefer the shadows." The operator gestured toward the DEA agent's body, face down in a puddle of rainwater and blood. "She thought she was saving you. Instead, she walked into the same trap you've been circling for 3 years." Thunder rolled across the mountains, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The part of him that had been Agent Marcus Castellanos, the man who'd believed in justice and procedure and institutional accountability, was clawing its way back to the surface. The ghost that had haunted him for 3 years was demanding answers. "If I go with you," he said, "there's no guarantee I come back out. No guarantees at all. The compound is designed to eliminate problems permanently, but it's also the only place you'll learn who really killed your partner and why." Marcus closed his eyes and saw Sarah's face one more time, not laughing in their kitchen, but as he'd found her in Guadalajara, execution-style bullet wound behind her left ear. Professional work by someone who'd wanted to make sure she never talked about what she'd discovered. When he opened his eyes, the decision was made. The comfortable lie of being Ghost the biker was burning away, leaving only the raw need for truth that had driven him into law enforcement 20 years ago. He was tired of running from shadows, tired of living half a life while the real killers walked free. "Take me to the compound," Marcus said. The operator nodded. "Welcome back, Agent Castellanos. Try not to get yourself killed before you learn what Sarah Chen really died for." As tactical lights cut through the darkness, leading him away from the massacre and toward answers that had been 10 years in the making, Marcus felt the familiar weight of purpose settling on his shoulders. The threshold was crossed. There would be no more hiding, no more pretending to be someone else. He was walking into hell to find the truth, and this time he wasn't planning to walk away. The tactical vehicles cut through mountain fog like predators, their headlights carving tunnels through darkness that seemed to swallow everything beyond a few feet. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of the lead Suburban, flex-cuffed to the door handle, a precaution that felt almost polite given the circumstances. The operator who'd recruited him from the massacre had removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face that belonged to someone Marcus should have recognized but didn't. "John Morrison," the man said, catching Marcus's stare. "We worked parallel operations in Colombia, 2009. You were running interdiction ops while I was handling asset management for a different alphabet agency." "CIA?" Morrison's smile carried no warmth. "Does it matter? We're all contractors now, Marcus. The old lines don't exist anymore." Through the rain-streaked windshield, Marcus watched the road climb steadily into the Cascade Mountains. They'd been driving for 2 hours, following logging roads that didn't appear on any GPS system he'd ever seen, the kind of routes that existed in the spaces between official maps, maintained by people who preferred their business conducted away from satellite surveillance. "The compound," Marcus said. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since the day you walked into that bar in Oakland and met Tank Rodriguez. We knew the Angels were planning something big. They'd been making inquiries about cartel operations, mapping supply routes through Northern California. When Marcus Castellanos started riding with them," Morrison shrugged. "That got our attention, your attention, not the DEA's. The DEA is a law enforcement agency. We're something else entirely." Morrison pulled a tablet from his vest and swiped through surveillance photos. Marcus saw himself at gas stations, outside Angel clubhouses, sitting in bars where deals were discussed. 3 years of his life cataloged with clinical precision. "We needed someone with your specific skill set and position when the time was right." Marcus felt the familiar burn of manipulation in his chest. You used me. We gave you purpose, direction, a family of sorts, even if it was temporary. Morrison's voice carried the detached tone of someone discussing livestock. Do you think it was coincidence that Tank approached you that night? That the Angels happened to need a new prospect with federal training right when you were drowning your guilt in whiskey? The truth hit Marcus like ice water. Tank's recruitment speech about brotherhood and second chances, the way the club had accepted him despite his obvious military background, the gradual build-up to tonight's operation. None of it had been organic. It had all been orchestrated by people who understood exactly which buttons to push. Tank didn't know, Marcus said, needing it to be true. Tank knew he needed someone with tactical experience for a major score. We simply ensured he found the right candidate. Morrison swiped to another photo. Tank meeting with a man Marcus didn't recognize outside a truck stop. $12,000 to cover your first year's expenses. Enough to make the pitch attractive without raising suspicions. Marcus closed his eyes and saw Tank's face in those final moments. The betrayal and confusion as bullets tore through the storm. A good man who'd thought he was helping a broken brother find his way back to something resembling family. Instead, he'd been a pawn in someone else's game. Manipulated into caring about a federal agent whose presence made the club a target. The others, Marcus said, Rocco, Diesel, the prospects, they were all just collateral damage, acceptable losses in service of a larger objective. The compound contains information that could destabilize international banking systems, topple governments, expose operations that span decades. A few bikers and a DEA team are a small price for that kind of intelligence. The Suburban's radio crackled to life. Base, this is Overwatch. Compound is secure. Package is ready for delivery. Morrison keyed his mic. Copy that. Overwatch. ETA 15 minutes. Through the windshield, Marcus could see lights beginning to appear through the trees. Not the warm glow of a Christmas tree farm, but harsh white spots that turned the forest into a stage set. Floodlights mounted on poles that hadn't existed when the Angels had scouted the location. Guard towers that had been camouflaged during their reconnaissance. The compound had been a trap from the beginning, designed to look vulnerable while bristling with enough firepower to level a small town. Sarah found something in Guadalajara, Marcus said. Something worth killing a federal agent to keep secret. Sarah Chen was brilliant, too brilliant for her own good. Morrison's expression grew thoughtful. She discovered that certain cartel operations were being protected by American intelligence assets, money laundering that funded black operations, drug routes that fed information networks. She was going to expose a symbiotic relationship that's kept both sides profitable for decades. So, you killed her. We defended institutional interests. Sarah's revelations would have destabilized carefully maintained equilibriums. Morrison turned to face Marcus directly. The same equilibriums that allowed you to spend 3 years playing biker instead of facing murder charges for her death. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but underneath the pain was something else. Recognition that he'd been carrying guilt that belonged to other people. Sarah's death hadn't been his failure. It had been his punishment. The compound lights grew brighter as they approached, illuminating a truth that had been 10 years in the making. The convoy slowed as they approached a checkpoint that materialized from the darkness like something from a fever dream. Guard towers flanked a reinforced gate, their searchlights sweeping methodical patterns across the tree line. Marcus counted at least 6 operators in full tactical gear, weapons trained on their vehicles despite Morrison's radio confirmation. These weren't cartel sicarios or even federal agents. They moved with the disciplined precision of military contractors who'd spent years perfecting the art of controlled violence. Impressive setup for a Christmas tree farm, Marcus said, flexing his fingers against the flex cuffs. The plastic restraints had cut off circulation 20 minutes ago, but the numbness felt appropriate somehow. Everything about his life had been numb for 3 years. Morrison chuckled as they passed through the checkpoint. The farm is real, has been for 15 years. Perfect cover for moving assets through the Pacific Northwest. Seasonal workers who don't ask questions. Legitimate agricultural permits. Truck traffic that looks routine to satellite surveillance. He gestured toward rows of Douglas fir visible in the floodlights. During Christmas season, this place processes 2,000 trees a week. money laundering disguised as holiday spirit. The compound proper sprawled across what had once been a logging camp, prefab structures connected by covered walkways and surrounded by enough razor wire to secure a prison. Motion sensors tracked their passage, red laser dots dancing across the suburban's windshield like digital fireflies. Marcus had infiltrated cartel strongholds in Mexico that felt less militarized than this supposedly abandoned tree farm. "How many people know about this place?" he asked. "Fewer than there were this morning." Morrison's smile held no warmth. "Your angel brothers weren't the only loose ends we've been cleaning up. Agent Vasquez's investigation unit has been systematically eliminated over the past 72 hours. Car accidents, home invasions, apparent suicides. Very tidy work." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're talking about federal agents, people with families, careers, pension plans. I'm talking about threats to national security. Sarah Chen started something in Guadalajara that's been metastasizing for a decade. Her investigation identified financial networks that span 5 countries and fund operations your clearance level never allowed you to imagine." Morrison's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing quarterly earnings. "We've spent 10 years containing the damage. Tonight, we finish the job." The Suburban pulled to a stop beside a structure that looked like a hunting lodge crossed with a maximum security facility. Solar panels covered the roof, satellite dishes clustered around a communications array, and enough backup generators to power a small city. Through reinforced windows, Marcus could see banks of computer equipment that belonged in an NSA facility rather than a rural hideout. Morrison cut his restraints with a tactical knife. "Try not to run. The perimeter is equipped with automated defense systems that don't distinguish between authorized personnel and trespassers. Last contractor who tried to leave without proper clearance provided an excellent demonstration of why we invest in quality hardware." Marcus rubbed circulation back into his hands, studying the compound's layout through the Rain Street windshield. Guard positions, camera angles, probable fields of fire for the automated systems Morrison had mentioned. Old habits died hard, even when the tactical assessment was purely academic. He wasn't planning an escape. He was preparing for what promised to be his final conversation with whoever had orchestrated Sarah's death. "The man inside," Marcus said as they approached the lodge's reinforced entrance. "Who is he?" "Someone you trusted once. Someone whose betrayal cost you everything you valued." Morrison paused with his hand on a biometric scanner. "Someone who's been very eager to see you again, Agent Castellanos." The scanner beeped, and heavy locks disengaged with mechanical precision. Warm air rushed out, carrying scents of coffee and ozone from electronic equipment. Marcus stepped across the threshold and felt the weight of 10 years pressing down on his shoulders. Somewhere in this compound was the truth about Guadalajara, about Sarah's execution, about the puppet master who'd been pulling strings since that warehouse became a slaughterhouse. Inside, the lodge's rustic exterior gave way to a command center that rivaled anything Marcus had seen during his federal career. Wall-mounted displays showed satellite feeds from around the globe, financial data streaming in real-time, communication intercepts in a dozen languages. The scope of the operation made his chest tight. This wasn't some rogue intelligence cell. It was a parallel government with resources that dwarfed most sovereign nations. "Marcus." The voice came from the far end of the room, familiar despite 10 years and careful modulation. "You look exactly like I expected. Older, harder, but still carrying that weight of misplaced responsibility." A figure emerged from the shadows beside a bank of monitors, and Marcus felt the foundation of his world shift one final time. The face was familiar, weathered by a decade of secrets and careful anonymity, but the eyes were exactly as he remembered them, intelligent, calculating, and completely without conscience. The man who'd killed Sarah Chen smiled like an old friend welcoming him home. Marcus felt his knees threaten to buckle as recognition hit like a physical blow. The man stepping into the light wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the shoulder holster beneath, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Deputy Director William Hayes, the same Hayes who'd shaken Marcus's hand at Sarah's funeral, who'd delivered the eulogy about sacrifice and service, who'd personally approved Marcus's medical leave after the Guadalajara investigation went sideways. You look surprised, Marcus. Did you really think Sarah stumbled onto that cartel operation by accident? Hayes moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the sterile command center. She was following breadcrumbs I left specifically for her brilliant little mind to find. Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward where his sidearm used to rest, finding only empty leather. His service weapon had been confiscated 3 years ago, along with his badge and his illusions about justice. You son of a bitch, you fed her to them. I gave her exactly what she wanted, the chance to be a hero, to expose the big conspiracy, save the day, make her career. Hayes poured himself coffee from a machine that probably cost more than most agents made in a month. Sarah always was ambitious, reminded me of myself at that age, before I learned that idealism is just inexperience wearing a mask. The command center's screens flickered with real-time surveillance feeds from around the globe. Financial transactions flowing through offshore accounts, shipping manifests from ports Marcus didn't recognize, communication intercepts in languages he couldn't identify. The scope of Hayes's operation made the Angels' drug trafficking look like a neighborhood lemonade stand. The cartel meeting in Guadalajara, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. You knew it was a trap. I designed the trap. Spent 6 months setting it up, feeding intelligence to the right people, making sure Sarah would be in exactly the right place at exactly the wrong time. Hayes settled into a leather chair that faced the wall of monitors like a throne. She'd been investigating financial irregularities in DEA seizure accounts, getting close to understanding how certain operations funded off-books intelligence gathering. I needed her eliminated before she could connect the dots. Marcus felt something fundamental breaking inside his chest. For 10 years, he'd carried the guilt of Sarah's death like a cancer, convinced his tactical mistakes had cost his partner her life. The sleepless nights, the bourbon breakfasts, the slow slide into disgrace, all of it built on a lie crafted by the man who'd signed his performance evaluations. The warehouse surveillance, Marcus said, the footage that disappeared, showed my assets eliminating a federal agent who'd become inconvenient. Rather incriminating, don't you think? Hayes sipped his coffee like they were discussing the weather. Amazing how evidence can vanish when the right people decide it never existed. Amazing how investigations can be redirected when the right pressure is applied to the right careers. Morrison stood near the entrance, weapon drawn but not quite pointed at Marcus, a reminder that running wasn't an option even if his legs would cooperate. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the compound, rain hammering against reinforced windows hard enough to rattle the frame. The sound reminded Marcus of gunfire, of that night in Guadalajara when everything he'd believed about duty and honor had died in a warehouse that smelled like cordite and betrayal. You destroyed my life, Marcus said. I gave your life meaning, purpose, direction. Hayes gestured toward the surveillance feeds covering the wall. For 3 years, you've been exactly where I needed you, embedded with the Angels, gaining their trust, positioning yourself for tonight's operation. Do you really think Tank Rodriguez chose you at random? That your particular skill set just happened to match what the club needed for their big score? The truth hit Marcus like ice water. Tank's recruitment pitch about brotherhood and second chances, the Angels' gradual acceptance of his military background, the careful build-up to the compound raid. None of it had been organic. It had all been orchestrated by Hayes to put him in exactly this position, at exactly this moment. The massacre tonight, Marcus said. You killed them all just to get me here. I eliminated loose ends and delivered the one person who could identify Sarah's real killer. Efficient multitasking. Hayes stood and moved to a wall safe, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Your Angel brothers died believing they were robbing El Chapo's hideout. They never knew they were walking into a reunion 10 years in the making. Hayes withdrew a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. Sarah's case file, the real one, not the sanitized version Marcus had seen during the internal investigation. Crime scene photos that had never made it into evidence, witness statements that contradicted the official timeline, financial records showing massive fund transfers in the hours before Sarah's death. Everything you need to understand what Sarah Chen really died for, Hayes said, setting the folder on a table between them. And everything you need to decide whether you're still the idealistic agent who thought justice mattered more than survival. Marcus stared at the folder, his hands trembling with a decade of suppressed rage. The truth was finally within reach, but he could feel the weight of Hayes's trap closing around him like the walls of a tomb. Marcus reached for the folder with hands that felt detached from his body, muscle memory overriding the voice in his head screaming that this was another trap within a trap. The manila surface felt real enough, substantial in a way that nothing else had for the past 3 years inside Sarah's crime scene photos stared back at him. Not the sanitized images he'd seen during the internal investigation, but raw documentation of what had really happened in that Guadalajara warehouse. Sarah's body positioned differently than he remembered. Bullet wounds that didn't match the trajectory analysis in the official report. Blood spatter patterns that told a story of execution rather than crossfire. In the corner of one photograph, barely visible in the shadows, stood a figure Marcus recognized. Hayes himself, younger but unmistakably present at the scene he'd later claimed to investigate. "She was alive when you got there," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "The warehouse was already secured when you put that bullet in her head." "Sarah Chen died serving her country," Hayes replied. "Just not in the way she imagined." Marcus flipped through witness statements that had never made it into evidence. Cartel informants describing American operatives who'd arranged the meeting. Financial records showing payments to sicarios who'd later died in convenient accidents. Phone transcripts of Sarah calling for backup that never came, her voice growing desperate as she realized she'd been abandoned. The documents painted a picture of betrayal so complete, it made Marcus's lungs feel too small for his chest. Sarah hadn't died because of tactical failures or bad intelligence. She'd died because Hayes needed her dead, and he'd used Marcus as the unwitting bait to deliver her to the slaughter. "The emergency frequency," Marcus said, remembering Sarah's final transmission. "She was calling for extraction when you jammed the signal. Operational security demanded radio silence. We couldn't risk compromising other assets in the field." Hayes's tone remained maddeningly professional, as if discussing quarterly budgets rather than the murder of a federal agent. Sarah understood the risks when she chose to pursue an investigation beyond her clearance level. Marcus found surveillance footage stills that showed the warehouse from angles the official investigation had never revealed. Hayes arriving 2 hours before the supposed cartel meeting. American contractors sweeping the building for witnesses, Sarah's vehicle being disabled to prevent escape. Every detail had been orchestrated with the precision of a military operation, except the enemy had been wearing a federal badge. "You recorded everything," Marcus said, staring at timestamps that proved premeditation. "You documented her execution like a training exercise." Documentation ensures accountability, prevents mission creep and emotional decision-making. Hayes moved to pour himself more coffee, his movements casual despite the weight of the revelations between them. Sarah's death served larger purposes than her life ever could have. The intelligence networks she threatened to expose have prevented 3 international conflicts and eliminated dozens of terrorist cells. Her sacrifice has saved thousands of lives. Marcus felt something fundamental breaking inside his chest as he processed the scope of Hayes's rationalization. 10 years of guilt had been built on the assumption that incompetence had killed his partner. Learning that her death was calculated murder felt like having his spine replaced with broken glass. "The internal investigation," he said. "My dismissal, the criminal charges that disappeared, all theater." "Necessary theater. You were too close to the truth, too invested in finding justice for your dead partner." Hayes settled back into his chair, studying Marcus with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. "We needed you angry, guilty, desperate enough to throw away everything you'd built, desperate enough to accept brotherhood from outlaws who'd give you purpose when the system failed you." The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. Tank's recruitment hadn't been coincidence. It had been orchestrated by people who understood exactly which emotional buttons to push. The Angel's acceptance of his tactical expertise hadn't been brotherhood. It had been manipulation designed to position him for tonight's massacre. "How many people have you killed to keep this secret?" Marcus asked. "Fewer than the number who would have died if the secret got out." Hayes stood and moved to the wall of monitors, their glow casting his face in harsh blue light. "Agent Vasquez's investigation team. The 3 cartel informants who knew about our arrangement. A journalist in Mexico City who was asking inconvenient questions. Your Angel brothers who stumbled onto operational security they couldn't understand." Marcus closed the folder, his hands steady now despite the rage building in his chest. "You're going to kill me too." "I'm going to offer you a choice," Hayes said. "Join the operation that's been using Sarah's death to prevent international catastrophes, or join Sarah in permanent silence. Either way, the truth dies in this room tonight." Outside, the storm's intensity seemed to mirror the destruction of everything Marcus had believed about justice, loyalty, and redemption. He was trapped in a command center with his partner's killer, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American intelligence, with no backup coming and no escape possible. All seemed lost